Welcome to the Prepped and Polished podcast, the podcast that empowers you to take control of your education, featuring weekly interviews with influencers in the world of education, as well as tutoring tips, lessons, and updates. And now, here's your host.
Hi everyone, welcome to another tutoring tips episode of the Prepped and Polished podcast. It's Terri of Prepped and Polished. Please be sure to check out our website, www.preppedandpolished.com. For tutoring in person or online, call us 781-753-9951 or chat with us instantly on our website. You can join our Prepped and Polished community on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Prepped and Polished. If you have a question after the show, please ask us a question on the chat feature on our website. We love hearing from you. Let's get right to episode number 193 on how to avoid 3 pitfalls of rhetorical skills questions on the ACT English test. And this will be about transitions involving sentences. And transitions can be connecting sentences or within sentences. First, it's important to know that the ACT English test has 2 question types, usage and mechanics, and the rhetorical skills questions. Usage and mechanics questions test you on punctuation, grammar, word usage, and sentence structure. Rhetorical skills questions cover style, strategy, and organization. I tell my students that stands for SOS, and they do need help. Most of my students dread the rhetorical skills questions because they find them the most difficult, the most cumbersome, and the most time-consuming. And sometimes spending too much time on the rhetorical skills questions takes away from the usage mechanics, which can be easier. So I tell them first, let's tackle one of the most common type of rhetorical skills questions. It's transitions involving sentences. I think the whole key with transition words is to know 3 categories of transition words. And if students kind of memorize this or make it their own or familiarize themselves with these, I think the rhetorical questions can be much easier. So there's continuers that add information, and then there's contradictors that show a contrast, and cause and effect transition words. Some of the common ones for continuers are and, also, furthermore, moreover, words like that. In fact, similarly, then, next, finally, those all add information. Contradictors, some of them are easy to remember, but yet, however, although, nevertheless, instead, even so, despite, still, meanwhile. And then, of course, cause and effect. One thing causes the next. Words like accordingly, as such, since, consequently, therefore, thus, so, as a result, and because. And if students sort of get these under their belt, it can really, really help. Here's just an easy example, what I mean about knowing those words. Here's 2 sentences that are connected by transition words. Orcas are very social animals. Even so, they live in pods of up to 12 animals. Now, if this were on the ACT, a student knowing the chart would recognize that even so is a contradictor. And we don't want to contradict anything there. We're saying orcas are social, and, so they live in pods of up to 12 animals. Consequently, they do, or as such. So we need words that are cause and effect. That makes that kind of question very easy if you know the right categories. Some other steps that really help students when confronted with transition words within sentences or connecting sentences. On the English test, if they cross out the underlined words, the transition words, and read the 2 sentences or read the portion without them, sometimes it makes it more clear what's needed. Really have to read carefully, and often when you cross out the transition, an obvious transition jumps out at you. Like all of a sudden you realize, oh, I need a word like however. Deciding what type of relationship is needed in the sentence. Do we need one of those three, a continuer, a contrast, or cause and effect? And that helps to narrow down choices and rule out answers that don't make sense or aren't grammatical. Another tip I tell students, if two choices are synonyms, two answer choices, neither is correct. If there's two words from the same category, like two continuers, how would you know which one to pick? I mean, there's no right or wrong, so they could be ruled out. And you always have to plug the answer back into the sentence to check and make sure the transition is logical. Here's another quick example. There was a passage on the ACT English test about theater goers. It talked about tourists and New Yorkers. Most theater goers are tourists and New Yorkers, and they are at a certain theater to attend a performance. But then there were other patrons who were architecture buffs who were there to simply admire the Lyceum Theater. And students had to decide in this sentence, most are there to attend a performance. A few, and on the test it said, for example, are likely to be architecture buffs there to admire the stunning building itself. Well, for example is a continuer, and right there, you could see how that, knowing those words would help a student. We don't want a continuer there. We want a contrast word. Most are there to attend a performance. A few, something like however, are likely to be architecture buffs there to admire the stunning building. So a student could see that they need a contrast word instead of a continuer. And one of the answer choices was however. Other choices were continuers or cause and effect words, which didn't make any sense. So I think knowing those three categories would really help a student to help them with rhetorical skills questions, particularly the transitions involving sentences. One other important tip is that I tell students that rhetorical questions typically take longer than usage mechanics questions on the ACT English test. So if they aim to complete 2 questions per minute, there's 75 questions, they'll have 7 to 8 extra minutes to spend on tricky rhetorical questions. They could go back and review some of their answers. So that's just a few ways that students can boost their score on the ACT English test. Well, this wraps up our show, episode number 193, How to Avoid 3 Pitfalls of Rhetorical Skills Questions on the ACT English test. This is really just part 1, transitions involving sentences. Be on the lookout for our next podcast episode number 194, which will be our next interview with an educational expert. Remember to access all of our podcast episodes. Go to www.preppedandpolished.com/podcast. Thanks for joining us on the Prepped and Polished podcast. Now go out there and take control of your education.
You've been listening to the Prepped and Polished podcast. For more information, check out preppedandpolished.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening. Class dismissed.